right, good morning. How y'all doing? Good. All right. So, like he said, my name is Amber Jones, and I represent Neighborhoods Organizing for Change, or NOC. I am the educational organizer with this amazing group of just people doing amazing work for our communities. And so, like Montega said, I'm going to give a historical arc. We can't talk about our solutions until we understand the problems that we have persisted under for hundreds of years. So let's take it all the way back to the early 1700s. Before the formal institution of our country, less than 100 years when the first slave ship rolled into the East Coast of now what we know as the United States. When we talk about slavery, we have to understand the fact that black bodies on American soil were not considered human. They legally were not considered human for the longest of time. So when we talk about slavery and the institution of child slavery in the U.S., we're talking about an economic system. So white plantation owners, slave owners saw black bodies as property. So when your property goes missing, your valuable property goes missing, you need a system to get your stuff back. So when we talk about runaway slaves and slave rebellions, what was created to offset that were slave patrols. So community members took up arms, took up the responsibility to get people's stuff back. And I'm talking about it in a very cruel way because that's what it was. We were stuff. We were property. We were something to make a means to an end, to make a quick buck, to build an economic institution. So we're talking about, I need to get my stuff back so I can make this money. So I can buy my land, I can build this plantation, I can sell these goods, and I can be a millionaire. And so not long after that, when we talk about the institution of this country, we talk about the U.S. Constitution, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 was an act of legislation that made it possible within the U.S. Constitution, within the Fugitive Slave Clause, to give white Americans the right to go reclaim slaves if they ran away. So this is less than 20 years from the institution of our country, less than 20 years, the Independence Day. Fighting for our freedom, but also simultaneously putting people in chains and treating them as less than a human being. So we're talking about a whole system of slavery, slavocracy, as I like to say it, because it was a slave-based democracy. And we go through the Civil War, and we go through this phase of emancipation and abolition. So to the American eye, now we see African Americans, we see people who are deemed as slaves as legal people with legal rights. We have this 13th Amendment, right, that supersedes this fugitive slave clause. However, that doesn't mean that the slaveocracy automatically disappeared or that it wasn't reinforced in some kind of way. Let's talk about black codes. So black codes, they emerged very near after the Civil War, post-Civil War, within a decade or two. And these were codes that made it illegal to basically be human. They were made to police black lives. So let's talk about some of the black codes that they had. They started off in the South, and they just restricted black people's freedom. So let's talk about lurking. So if I'm walking around or loitering, someone could pick me up and say, yo, you gotta go to jail. Like, this is illegal for black people just to be out here just enjoying the day. Or let's intersect that with sexism. You're a black man looking at a white woman. I'm gonna take you up to jail. Or let's talk about the suppression of economic freedoms. So there were restrictions on whether or not I could buy land, or own land, or conduct business. So all these types of laws, these black codes that actually laid the foundation for Jim Crow as we come to know it, allowed the slaveocracy to continue. So literally black people were taken up in droves to jails. And jails started having a financial relationship with former plantation owners. So they had a system called convict leasing, so that if you get arrested, in order to serve your sentence, you may go work on someone's plantation. So this is the emergence of chain gangs. This is the emergence of the sharecropping system. So that former plantation owners still had a way to maintain their labor force and still maintain low costs in relation to that. And still black people are in chains, even though they're not called slaves anymore, right? It's not slavery anymore, but it's still slavery. Because they're not making a fair wage, they're not being able to build an estate, they're not able to build wealth for our communities. And so that lays the foundation for Jim Crow. We go through the civil rights movement. We think like, oh, Jim Crow is just dead, we good, right? Nah. So let's talk about mass incarceration. How many people read the new Jim Crow in this room? Okay, y'all woke a little bit, okay. So let's talk about the prison industrial complex, right? So we talk about this system that elevates low-level offenses and criminalizes them to make a system where we are by far the most heavily incarcerated country in this nation. And it's not by accident, and it's not because we just have a bunch of bad people in our country. It's to maintain the economic system of oppression. So when we talk about literally funneling thousands and millions of people into jail, having them work pennies on the dollar on the hour, making furniture and license plates, and having these privatized corporate relationships with corporations to get this labor so that they can save money, instead of giving these jobs to people in the workforce for a fair wage, in jail for a fair wage, whether in jail or out of jail, so that they can make a living and not be in jail for the rest of their life. We're not rehabilitating people within the system. We're allowing recidivism to happen like crazy, so when you get out of jail, one little slip up, you get right back in, and people are caught. And then people depend, they build a dependency on this system. There's a weird level of security that is placed in someone's mind, so that if they try to go out and actually get a job, it feels 10 times more difficult. So we've built not only a system of physical slavery up to this point, but mental as well. And that is some of the things we're going to talk about when it comes to having a holistic perspective of how we break the system down. So let's talk real briefly, like 1 minute, about what are we trying to do. And so for our modern day, we've seen amazing work come out of the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Some people in this room, some people in space, some of our closest friends are some of the leaders within this movement. And I think at the core of Black Lives Matter is a system that we're trying to break down by reimagining how to regulate social behavior. We're trying to reimagine. We're not trying to work within the system, we're trying to create a whole new one. I will give you a dope book to read called Black Radical Imagination by Robert D.G. Kelley. It's all about, like, we have to step into a new level of thinking, right? So when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we're talking about an organization, a decentralized movement, really, of black people, people of color, LGBTQ, queer, trans leaders doing this work, putting their bodies on the line because we want to see a whole new system. We don't want to work within the system anymore. We want to put forth abolitionist perspectives on our prison and police systems, okay?